Opposition leader Peter Dutton has called for Senator Lidia Thorpe to step down from the Senate after she accused him of being racist and violent. Senator Thorpe made these explosive claims during a podcast appearance earlier this week. On the podcast, she criticized Dutton's so-called Trumpian tactics and alleged that his past as a Queensland police officer involved harming Indigenous people and abusing his authority. In response, Dutton dismissed Thorpe's remarks as absurd and branded her a publicity seeker during an interview with Sydney's 2GB radio. He stated that Thorpe was not stable enough to serve in Parliament and accused her of using attention-grabbing antics to appeal to the far left. He reiterated his view that she does not belong in the Senate, calling her behaviour a calculated effort to stay in the spotlight. Senator Thorpe has been no stranger to controversy. Last year, during King Charles III's visit to Australia, she staged a disruptive protest, shouting, "You are not our king, give us a treaty," as the monarch addressed Parliament House. Her actions drew widespread criticism from politicians across the political spectrum. Thorpe later reflected on the incident, stating that her message advocating for Indigenous rights was being overshadowed, and that she only seemed to gain media attention when she played up. Prominent figures like Warren Mundine, a leading Nome campaigner and former Liberal Party candidate, have weighed in on Thorpe's behaviour. Mundine labelled her comments about Dutton as nonsense and described her as a waste of space. He went further to criticise Thorpe's tactics, accusing her of making baseless statements designed solely to keep her name in the media. Dutton initially refrained from engaging with Thorpe's remarks, stating he didn't want to give her the attention she seeks. However, he eventually responded, urging Australians to reject extreme political movements like the Greens and Teals. Dutton described these groups as radical, extreme communist movements that threaten Australia's social fabric. He also encouraged parents to educate their children about the dangers of aligning with such ideologies. Senator Thorpe, who has Indigenous heritage through her mother and a white father, has frequently spoken about racism in Australia. She claims it is a pervasive issue, particularly for Aboriginal people, who face discrimination in public spaces and everyday life. Reflecting on the Voice to Parliament referendum, Thorpe argued that racism in Australia was brought to the surface during the debate. She said, "Racism is real, and my people face it every day." During the podcast, Thorpe also criticised Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and his government, describing their performance as disappointing. She expressed frustration over the lack of progress on issues like treaty-making, truth-telling, and addressing injustices faced by Indigenous Australians. "I thought we could achieve some wins with Labor in power, but that hasn't happened," she said. Thorpe pledged to continue holding the government to account on these matters. Thorpe also used the podcast to draw parallels between the struggles of Indigenous Australians and the situation in Palestine. She described the ongoing conflict in Palestine as genocide and ecocide, drawing comparisons to the historical treatment of her own people. "We need to stand in solidarity against genocide," she stated firmly. Despite her outspoken nature, Thorpe's approach has not gone without backlash. Following her royal protest last year, Thorpe was censured by her Senate colleagues in her absence. In the days that followed, she was seen shouting obscenities in the upper house. Critics argue that such behavior undermines her cause and alienates potential allies. Warren Mundine further countered Thorpe's claims about racism in Australia, questioning why millions of people from diverse backgrounds continue to migrate to the country if it is as discriminatory as she claims. Mundine highlighted the diversity of Liberal Party candidates, including those of Chinese, Indian, and Indigenous heritage, as evidence of Australia's multicultural values. He pointed to Sam Cale, a Muslim father of two running as the Liberal candidate in Western Sydney, as an example of this inclusivity. While Dutton and Mundine dismissed Thorpe's remarks as attention-seeking, the debate highlights deeper issues surrounding race, politics, and national identity in Australia. The nation's changing demographics, driven by high immigration rates and a relatively low birth rate, are creating a more multicultural society, but also sparking tensions around cultural dominance and identity. According to the 2021 census, 57% of Australians reported European ancestry, 17% identified as Asian, and just over 3% identified as Indigenous. The changing face of Australia is prompting a broader discussion about who gets to define its future. Whether you see Lidia Thorpe as a disruptive force for change or a polarizing figure, there's no denying her ability to spark debate and keep issues of Indigenous rights in the spotlight. As the political landscape evolves, Australians will need to grapple with complex questions about representation, equality, and the role of dissent in democracy. Thanks for tuning in to today's update. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more insights into Australian politics and current events. See you next time.